All right, everybody, welcome back, Treasury Talent community. We are here for another Wednesday afternoon discussion. In some of your cases, it might be Thursday morning, depending on where you're at around the globe. But thank you for joining us again today. We've got an incredible topic that we get so much interaction and feedback on. It's always something that people are always asking about, and that is, of course, what is our salary and compensation range. So we're going to talk deep dive into salaries today, what some of those ranges are, what the factors of that all is. But before we get into that into massive detail, what we wanted to point out is that a lot of the data we're going to share today is specifically around the California and New York markets. And we'll get, you can ask any questions around your market, but that's where the data that we're going to be sharing is coming from. But welcome, guys. Thank you for being here, Joe, Scotty, Simon. It's another Wednesday.
Thanks for having us. Your shirt matches your eyes today. A lot of blue going on.
It's all blue. You got red eyes today or not?
Yeah, no, brown all the time.
There you go. Well, right on, Scotty. Why don't you kick us off today, man? A couple weeks ago, we talked about job titles and things like that. And during that conversation, comp comes up. But when we're looking at comp plans and things like that, like how important is the comp plan? Is that all you should be basing your decision on when it comes to, advancing and moving forward in your treasury career?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Donnie. So, to answer the question directly, how important is it? Obviously, everyone's different. And so for many people, frankly, it's going to be number one, top of the list. At least most people, it's going to be at least top three. But at the end of the day, again, it's highly subjective. It depends a lot on the person. And, where it makes a difference in terms of like, should I actually accept a lower compensation? Should I really consider that? As far as I'm concerned, and based on my experience, and I think these guys would agree, is are you going to have an opportunity to, if you take a step back in compensation, are you taking a step forward in your career? In other words, do you have an opportunity to get paid to learn? So, think about it. You go back to school, you get an MBA, and you're going to pay, I don't know, anywhere from $20,000 to $120,000 for that. You're paying out of pocket for that. But if you take a 10, 15, depending on what level in your career, if you take a pay cut, but you're actually learning on the job, you can round out your treasury experience. In that case, it might actually make sense to take a pay cut, because the pay cut you take today, you're going to earn that back in spades. It's going to pay dividends for you over the long haul, just based on the experience that you earn. So I think that's where it may make sense to take a pay cut. There are other scenarios where it may as well, but certainly the most common scenario we see is that one right there, where you have an opportunity to learn a different aspect of treasury that'll pay off long-term.
Right. So a little bit of short-term pain, long-term gain can be certainly something to consider at certain times, depending on the offer out there. Excellent. Simon, compensation plans are, vary obviously from company to company, but what do you see? Like how does a treasurer typically get compensated?
So just to touch on Scotty's point before I go on to that one is, I think most people, what I find having been in treasury recruitment for a very long time, is most people don't take a pay cut. Like, salary is really important to people, and it's a driver for why people make a move. So, I think that, for the listeners out there, are we saying you need to take a pay cut? Not necessarily, but, that's not really what we're coming at. I think most of the time, you're going to make a move to go forward in salary, because it's a key driver. Like, why make a move to go backwards unless it's a really good opportunity? So we're definitely not advocating that by any means. We're really saying, you just need to think about other factors. But most people make a move in order to get more money. Like, particularly in this low inflation environment, people aren't really getting pay rises in their current businesses or they're getting very little pay rise. Whereas when you make a move, you definitely get a bump in order to make that move. So, compensation is definitely a key factor in that. And I think to some degree, it's a reason to make that move. But also, I think it's one of those things that, titles we've talked about a lot. Titles aren't really what drive the job that you're doing. I think it's comp and salary that really drives that. So to me, I think that what you're getting paid in a job dictates more what a role is rather than the title of it. So for argument's sake, if you're going to a particular level, and I'm just going to pull a number here and say 150, at 150, is that a treasury manager or is that a treasury analyst? It doesn't really matter what the title is. You know what you're getting paid dictates more what that job is. If it was 120 and you were called a treasury manager, then you kind of know that it's actually more of an analyst. So to me, the comp side or the salary side of things is more of an indicator as to what the job really is rather than the title. But yeah, to come back to your point, how do people get paid? Look, the way that companies are operating these days, the way they structure their packages really is what sets them apart. You see a lot of, particularly in the tech side of things, there's a lot on the bonus and the incentive side of things, and to some degree less on the fixed. But really, what we're talking about today is very much on the fixed side. But yeah, the short-term incentive and the long-term incentive and the share plans are really what differentiate businesses. So you'll find that a lot of tech companies have a lot more on the upside and are probably not as well paid on the fixed side. Whereas if you go to like a utility or these capital-intensive type businesses that are long-term sort of plays, they tend to have a lot. They're better on the fixed, and they don't have as much on the incentive side. Probably, I would say in Treasury, the average on the incentive side is sort of a 20 to 30%, particularly if you're in that utility or long-term business. Whereas if you come back to the tech side of things, that can be very, very generous compared to that. So yeah, that's the bit that I think varies. But just bear in mind today, we're very much talking about the fixed side as opposed to the incentive, the total comp plan.
Got it. Joe, what typically are the factors that are going to determine like what somebody's compensated?
Yeah, so it really starts off with when the hiring manager goes to get approval from whether that's the HR team, the compensation team, whatever it may be. And that's usually where we're engaging with people is they say, hey, I'm going to have a need at this level. Here's what I'm thinking. With me being from the Motor City, usually what I tell them is, all right, we have a Cadillac taste and a Buick budget, so we need to realign here, right? So, but usually what's going to go into the levels and the different compensation levels within an HR or a comp team would be the geography and the market. Simon, we've brought it up a couple of times. What we're talking about specific is San Francisco and New York. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit different in Detroit. It's always funny because over the course of the winter, I talked to a lot of people from Michigan who are like, yeah, I want to go to Southern California, get me the heck out of the snow. Everything's great. I want to go make 300 grand as a treasury analyst. It's like, no, it's not going to happen. And here's why. So, it's one of those situations where the geography and the market will play into it. It's why you do see some moves in the market where you have maybe some of the larger tech companies following the IT trend of moving to lower cost areas like in Austin, Texas, or a Dallas, or in some cases even a Vermont. But so you have the geography market aspect of it. You have the complexity of the treasury operation. If it's just a straight cash management role with domestic operations, no FX, no capital markets, pretty simplistic, not a global operation, probably not going to pay as high as something that is a little bit more complex because it just ties into the scope of work. From there, you're going to have the size of the organization, whether it's private, public, that's also going to tie into your short-term, long-term incentives as well. And then you have different markets. This ties into the geography and the market piece. Like Detroit, we're a very heavy service center market. We don't have a lot of corporate headquarters outside of the autos, so the comp structures tend to be a little bit different, a little bit lower than they would be in, say, like a major financial services center like in New York City or Chicago, or out in the tech space out in San Francisco. So there's a lot more that goes into it. It starts right from the very beginning when the treasurer or director AT realizes that they have a need on their team. They have to go through those first round of approvals, and then that's usually when they're engaging their internal team or their external partners, and that's usually where we start providing the guidance around the scope and the responsibilities and what this should look like.
Yeah. What do you say? I mean, obviously with what's happened, globally with COVID and a lot of companies are starting to wiggle on, working from home, and now you're kind of seeing a lot of companies are like, hey, full-time remote have you guys kind of seen any of those, positions pop up and say a California-based company where they're open to now a remote worker where they weren't before?
Yeah, I was working with a company actually out in the New England area that they opened it up remote simply for the fact that they could hire someone in a lower cost center and still have that skill set. They're comfortable with the remote piece. And I know the common retort to that, at least in the IT space, has always been, well, you're paying me for my work, not based on where I live. But there's a disconnect there. It's not,
Right.
You're not being paid California prices in Michigan or Ohio, anywhere in the Midwest. It's just not going to happen.
Right. So the compensation is probably going to be adjusted, even though the company may be based out of San Francisco. You should probably prepare yourself to be being paid a market rate of wherever you're living, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's variable, right? But
yeah, and that's where it becomes that much more important to educate yourself as you're going through this. Make sure you have a solid understanding of the scope. Keep in mind that if you're working remotely, you're not putting the wear and tear on your car. It's going to reduce your costs at the same time, and it really doesn't change your standard of living. You want to adjust to your own market, and that ties into what Scotty was talking about.
Exactly.
Whatever works for me isn't necessarily going to work for Scotty or Simon or you even. It's just, everyone has their own cost base they have to cover, and that's really the determining factor there. I mean, I've chased money in my career, and I've wound up in some really bad situations for it. So it's, it all comes down to the person's risk tolerance. It comes down to what works for them, and then also what the market holds.
The other thing I think it's scary in that perspective, Donnie, is if you're going to think about it like that, you're actually competing with some pretty low cost centers. So if you want to compete with the Philippines and Vietnam and places like that from a salary perspective, that they can work for a pittance over there. So, as we start to go remote, obviously time zones play a factor. Obviously as an Aussie sitting in Sydney right now, I bear the brunt of time zones massively. But they're definitely, you want to be playing more to your strengths than your weaknesses, because there's a lot of low cost centers that you'd be competing against if you go down that path, like Asia, where
right.
they're not going to be paid the sort of money that you get in the US.
Right. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what unfolds. I don't think they're going to see a max exodus or something like that, but it's going to be interesting, specifically just what happens within the states and how that rolls out. And I think, to your point, Joe, kind of tying back in with Scotty, I think those are the things you kind of look at from the factors of, maybe to one person, it's more attractive to work from home than it is to make the extra 10K or for example, So I've got a question that came on here. I know everybody's kind of anxious to hear salary ranges, and we're going to get to that. But question from, excuse me if I don't get the name right here, but it's Esgi, I think. And they're asking, do you think in general, given how important the function Treasury is, are Treasury folks paid as much as they should be?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Phenomenal.
It's one of those funny things that Treasury gets. When you look at HR and how they look at things, they think of Treasury as part of a finance function, which obviously it is, but it's a higher paid function than the finance function, and that causes some issues, I think, when you're in the external market. And bear in mind as well, when we're talking here today, we are talking external. So we're talking people when they are moving jobs and when you are attracting someone to move jobs, as opposed to internal. I often have a butting of heads with HR when I start to talk to them about what they need to pay, because they think very much internal, and if they're moving someone internal. So I think that's definitely a factor. And so, in terms of your question, I personally think, Treasury, you only have to do one deal. Like if you can get 1 basis point on a deal, you're paying for the whole Treasury team. So, it's a very commercial function. It's something that, can really impact the bottom line. So arguably, I would say that they are underpaid relative to their importance in the organization, but you're just not going to get that through with HR. That you're still going to be viewed as part of a finance function. At the higher end of a finance function, the numbers are definitely better than what you would get in, core finance. But it is definitely an area that, relative to its importance and relative to the numbers that you're producing, on your deals, you are, it's an underpaid function for sure.
Yeah, and that ties into, you brought up a good point. It ties into how HR and comp teams pull their information too. Usually it's from salary surveys, and Treasury is a little bit of an underserviced market there. They don't have Treasury specific salary surveys. So they're like, there's a little bit of I guess funny math that goes into the HR and the comp teams as they try to determine what those salaries are and what they should be. And that's where, we have these conversations with the market and with Treasury leaders every day. So we have a good feel, and that's where we can be a strategic partner to them as well. And we have been. I mean, it's because there's no definitive data out there that says if you're an analyst, you need to be paid this. We have what we know in the market based on the conversations that we have every day. It's not like I can't pull a survey for you and say, look, this is exactly what's happening. It's all data that we collect in our conversations each and every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's obviously one of the advantages of working with a team so specialized in us, is that we're on the ground and we know, what's going on from real conversations and things like that. And we've actually got some really good questions coming in right now. Both of them are kind of a similar question, which is, Zolt was asking, he's kind of getting himself back out in the perm job market. He's always asked up front about salary. And basically, he tries to push that down, doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to get an understanding of the role. But his question is, what is the best strategy for getting his max salary? And it's kind of a same question for Michael, is I don't like to talk salary in the first interview. Is there a good time to discuss salary? So I think both really good questions. Again, what is the best strategy to get your max? And then is there a good time when's the best time to start talking salary?
Yeah, so HR teams and recruiters are going to try to get that out of you as quickly as possible. There's depending on which state you're in, make sure that you're educated around that too, because they should not be asking you what you're currently making. I know New York is a big one. They have legislation. Down here, I think California is the same way, where a recruiter or an HR department cannot legally ask you what you're making right now. In my opinion, and guys, feel free to jump in. I don't want to dominate this conversation by any stretch, but list a range and get them to list a number. Like, have them blink first. And that's where it pays to educate yourself on the front end, saying, well, look, I know someone in this role usually makes between this and this. That's acceptable to me. And that's where it's going to be easier during a phone interview or during an interview than it would be while just filling out an application. And that's why it's on the application, is, hey, what are you looking for? So at least if you can include a range on the applications, I would absolutely do that too.
Yeah, I think, it's one of those things that we all want to know as soon as possible, right? We don't want to waste time on, if you're on 200 and this is a 150K job, it's not in the right ballpark, is it? So, yeah, I think it's one of those things that, I'm all for being open. I think that, it all comes out in the wash anyway, but, if you can, to get your max, you want to hold out for as long as you possibly can without having to tell people.
Got it. Anytime in terms of the discussion, is there, for the actual having that conversation, if we can kick that into interview two, or conversation two, is probably more advantageous than obviously even at the end of conversation one.
Not necessarily. I think the one thing you want to be careful of as a candidate is making it seem like that. I mean, in fairness, again, we talked about this already. For most people, it's top three. It might be most important to you, but it's a bit of a dance, quite frankly. You don't want to make it seem like it's the most important thing to you. So I think it's okay. And to Simon's point, you don't want to waste anybody's time, especially your own. So it's okay if it comes out in the first conversation. It's probably not something you want to bring up as a candidate in the first conversation. If it gets brought up, I think, both Simon and Joe made good points in terms of, you really want to try to get them to throw out the first number. You want to be educated. You want to know what the range is or what you might be worth in the marketplace. But at the same time, it's definitely something that it will come up eventually. And in terms of negotiating from your best point of strength, I mean, in fairness, you do want to Joe's point about ranges, you want to make sure you illustrate your value to the hiring manager. And at the end of the day, the most important factor is, you don't have to accept an offer that's given, right? There's the time to negotiate on compensation is before you accept a job. So know that. That's kind of the biggest and guys, feel free to if you disagree with that, chime in here. But I think that absolutely the key is you want to negotiate before you accept a job. Don't accept and then try to negotiate. Negotiate up front, but know there's some risk there as well.
I totally agree with you, Scotty. Like your time to negotiate is when you're getting an offer. And let's face it, as treasury professionals, your job is about negotiation. I often laugh with hiring managers. It's like, well, they're going to negotiate. Like this is what they do. This is how they'll show you their value is that, this is their time to prove their worth. And I often have managers who are, hiring managers who are saying to me, I don't want a negotiation here, Simon. It's like, well, we're in treasury, like seriously, are you thinking that these guys are not going to negotiate? Like if they do this for a living, even if they just do it to show you that they're good at what they do, they're going to do it. So yeah, I 100% agree, Scotty. It is the time. And you don't have to do it like, it's not, if you're happy with the number they've thrown out, absolutely, you would take the job. But it's a funny dance and it is your time to negotiate.
And just a real quick caveat. I was just going to say a real quick caveat. If you're working with an internal recruiter or even an external recruiter who's not us, and they say that there's no budgeted range for this, they're lying. That's a red flag for you right there. I'll be perfectly honest. My pit bull, I'm sorry. Not great.
Keep it going, man.
We're back. We're back. Sorry. So they're like I was talking about, in order to get the position approved, they have to have a budget for it. So the whole, they don't really have a budget range, or we don't know what that is, that should be a red flag for you right there. And that's something that you want to explore further probably before moving forward if they're going to force you on the number.
Just had a question coming through, what about LinkedIn applications that ask for, preferred salary? Is that where you would probably recommend just trying to drop in a salary range there, or would you aim high there or aim low? And I mean, obviously that's you aim high and you could be completely disqualified right away. But what are your thoughts on that? From the LinkedIn application, they ask you for preferred salary. You obviously got to answer something there. So
yeah, I would, well, number one, I would try to find my way around that and try to network with the people who are the decision makers to get around the LinkedIn application. That's probably a different conversation for a different day. But yeah, I would try to list a range if at all possible there, and make sure you're educating yourself too. Like I said, the more you know and the more you can arm yourself with the market knowledge around you, the better chance you're going to have to maximize your salary.
Yeah, to Simon's point earlier, man, I mean, you want to, if you get an offer and you're really happy with that salary, don't negotiate. There's no reason. So it's the same thing here. It's like, you don't necessarily want to shoot higher than you would actually accept. And if you are forced, to Joe's point, if you feel like that's the only option, then put the number in that you feel like, is a compelling number for you. And if they disqualify you based on that number, good riddance. You avoided time wasting on both sides.
I agree with you, Scotty. I think that at the end of the day, if you have to put a number, if you have to give, go with the number that you're happy with. That's part of what we do in our job when we're talking to you guys is we want to know, okay, you're on X today. What are you comfortable with to make a move? And we're gonna maximize that. Don't get me wrong. Like if we can get you more, we'll get you more. But if we're working towards a number and we come back with that number and the company was happy with that number, then it's not a time to negotiate because we've done our job in making sure that we've got you what you're happy with. And like it's in our interest to get you as much as we possibly can, but at the same time, there are budgetary constraints, generally speaking. So, if you're getting the number you're happy with, you don't need to negotiate. It's not a must do.
Let's talk about numbers. I mean, I know everybody probably wants to know salary ranges. And again, just a reminder, we've all said it, but this is based off of California and New York market here. But Scotty, what are, kind of work ourselves, from the bottom to the top here. I mean, what are the salary ranges people can expect?
Yeah. So, okay. I think we've overblown the disclaimers, but, this is the big reveal, right? Everybody wants to know. And these ranges overlap. Like Simon said, oftentimes the salary is a better indication of what the job is than the title itself. And it's subjective, right? Depending on the company. I'm going to go into, generally speaking, we're talking about salary range here, not necessarily total compensation. But without further delay, When it comes to a treasury analyst and senior analyst role, we're probably anywhere from the $100,000 to about $140,000 a year range. For manager, that goes up $140,000 to $180,000. You're going to see some overlap now from manager to director, but I guess you could just, to make it clean, it's $180,000 to $225,000. At director level, it's going to be $225,000 to $275,000, and at the treasurer level, it's going to be $250,000 and above. And again, some treasurers out there are going to listen to that and they're going to be like, "What?" Either way, right? But we're talking about a range, and these things it can be all over the map. And we talk to companies all day, and sometimes I'd say, I'm surprised whether it's high or low at what companies think the salary should be at a given range. That's based on, a ton of anecdotal evidence. That's, I think, a really safe, set of ranges there.
Yeah, the last thing.
Just to give some clarity there, that's based on just a small data set of 25,000. So if anyone wants to question it, I'm quite happy to give you the 25,000 people to get out there and have a look for yourself. Just Scotty, you mentioned there 225 to 275. That's at AT level, assistant treasurer.
Oh, forgive me. Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure everyone realised that when you said it. And the key in there is have I ever placed someone as a treasurer on 200? Absolutely. Have I ever placed someone on 175 as a senior treasury analyst? Absolutely. So, what we've tried to give you guys here today is some very specific job title and salary for a unique, in an ideal world, that's what it would be. And we've had this conversation before on the LinkedIn Live around what about titles? Well, titles can vary. There's title inflation, there's title deflation. To us, the comp and what you're paid is a better indication of the level of the role than what the title is. So, bear in mind, titles can vary, but numbers wise, what we've talked about today is the purest form of what you would be paid in a role.
Yeah, the last thing that we want you to do is take this information, grab your torch and your pitchfork, and head into your boss's office tomorrow saying, "I need this or I quit." I think that's a little reckless, especially in this environment. It's just we're happy to talk through what we see in your specific market, assuming it's in the U.S. or in Australia. Unfortunately, don't have much in EMEA that we can speak to, so let me just head that off right there. But I'm happy to talk to anyone around Detroit, the tri-state area, Michigan, anyone on the East Coast. Scotty, West Coast, I think you can handle the same thing. Simon, you're just you're the master who can speak to pretty much anything. So I think any of the three of us are happy to answer any questions that you may have about it directly.
And I think the key in there as well is, when we sit down with a line manager that we're about to recruit for, whilst those numbers are overarching, every single situation is different. And so, it's very hard for us to put numbers out there as this is the be all and end all. We can sit down with someone tomorrow and have a conversation and say, well, actually that job should be paid X, and might be outside of the ranges we're talking about, but the parameters that they are working around might be different as well. So, I don't like the overarching. Everyone wants the overarching, and I'm sure there's going to be people out there who hit me on social media tomorrow to say, I've never seen those numbers before in my market. Well, they're the numbers that we know, guys. I don't make stuff up. I just tell you what I know.
Yeah. Well, and Simon, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, it ties into your tenure with the company too. If you've moved from analyst all the way up to treasurer, you're not going to be as well compensated as if you came in as a treasurer from the external market. It's just not going to, you're capped at your increases along the way due to HR and compensation and internal policies and everything that comes along with that. So there are so many factors that go into this, and that's why we always just say, find the money that works for you and that you're happy with, and hey, that's what matters at the end of the day. We're just here to guide you and inform you any way we can.
Right. That's a really good point, Joe. Like, generally speaking, the longer you've been in a business, the more under the market you are. So the reality is, if you move every 2-3 years, you're going to get a bump every 2-3 years. If you stay in the same business, I mean, since the GFC, what's that, 10 years ago now, 12 years ago now, it's been a really low inflation environment. So, most businesses are going at, 0 to 2% in terms of annual increases. more often zero than 2%. So if you've been in the same business for 10 years, the reality is even without trying, you are massively under market versus the same person who was sitting beside you 10 years ago who's moved 3 times. The reality of that is that person who moved 3 times, and that's not the right thing to do always, but it might have been the right thing for them. That person who moved 3 times is definitely going to be on more money than you because they got a bump each time and they negotiated each time.
And to Simon's, your earlier point, we're not saying that's right. That's just the reality. That's just what happens. I mean, in fairness, we're reporting back what we know based on the 25,000 people that we have in our database and the countless conversations that we've had since we've been in these markets.
Yeah, got a question coming in here, guys. If you have an answer to this one, how do employers respond to candidates who have unvested stock or cash compensation at their existing companies?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I had this conversation yesterday. Look, the funny thing is, I would say like pre-GFC, it was a normal discussion that we had, and it was upfront, and people were paying, they were paying to make good. Whereas I personally haven't seen a lot in the last 10, 12 years where people are doing that. Occasionally, it happens, but it's not the norm anymore. So I just think it's one of those things that you need to be upfront about. The minute the salary comes up and we start talking, is to say, okay, I've also got this, and that's something that it's not normal, and it will discount you sometimes. Like some businesses, I mean, we spoke to a guy yesterday, didn't we, Joe? And he was saying, he had some pretty hefty golden handcuffs on him, and he basically got an offer, and then when he started talking about what he was leaving behind, they said, well, no, the offer is this is the offer today, and you'll have to leave that behind. You'll get share options and you'll get LTIs with us, but we're not going to make good on what you're leaving behind. So I would say in the market generally at the moment, it's not the norm to make good on what you're leaving behind.
Yeah, and that's why they have those vesting. I mean, I'm not giving anyone anything they don't already know, but that's why you have the vesting periods. It's almost a retention bonus at some point, and then they're trying to hang on to people for exactly that reason.
Excellent stuff, guys. Anything else that we last thoughts from anybody here?
No, I mean, just chat to us. If you're not sure about something, we've got a hell of a lot of, 25,000 is a, it's a small data set, I'm sure, for many people out there, but we've got a lot of information and we're happy to share it. That our job is about doing the right thing by you. We don't make decisions in our job. We just share information. That's our business. So if you want to know something, look us up, give us a call. We're happy to share as much as we can and get you the situation and the job that you want. Excellent.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us this week. We'll come back next Wednesday, same bat time, same bat channel. We'll have another fun topic. In the meantime, if you need to reach out to us, just head to treasurytalent.com. There's a contact us page there, or you can reach out to any of the numbers on the page. On this thread here, if you have any topics that you may be of interest to you where we can bring some value, please, we're looking for you guys to drive these things. We want to be as valuable as we possibly can as a company, bringing the best information that's relevant to you guys. So, whether you send that to us via, the Treasury Talent page or right here on this thread, we want to hear from you guys, definitely. So thank you so much for spending your time with us this afternoon. We'll see everybody next week.